Over the history of games, there have been few to truly change the landscape as much as Half-Life. Half-Life was released in November 1998 and had a long-lasting impact on the gaming scene in several ways. Firstly, it changed the way that narratives were told for years to come. Secondly, Half-Life spawned a modding community which was a launching point for some future full releases. Lastly, it had a large impact on the modern gaming scene. Within Half-Life, they went for what was, at the time, a new way of storytelling. Instead of stopping the gameplay to show a cutscene and take the player away from the moment, the game allows you to stay there and tell the story as you go along. Instead of showing a cutscene to let you know that the crawling alien boys are bad guys, they let you get attacked and assume that you'll figure it out on your own. This led to many other games having this type of narrative telling, whether as a way to tell the main story or as a secondary aspect to learn more about the world. One example of this is in Oblivion, specifically when doing the Dark Brotherhood questline. In the later stages, you're told to continue going around killing people, but if you look around their houses to try and find out why they're being targeted, you can find black hand robes, which foreshadows the fact that you're killing off your allies without knowing it. Also, while other games of the time were fast-paced run and guns, like Quake or Doom, Half-Life was slow-paced, which is especially shown within the 10-minute tram ride at the start of the game, showing off all the beautiful animations and the power of what was impressive at the time. Another thing it brought was the involvement of puzzles within the narrative and the environment, making it so that parts actually needed to be thought about instead of the same running and shooting 24/7. Lastly, due to the lack of cutscenes, the silence of the character, and the ability to shoot the other scientists, there's a sense of moral ambiguity, which, at least in our opinion, adds to the experience, as it's not Gordon who's making the choices, it's the player whose morality is being questioned. Another thing that came from Half-Life was a vibrant modding community. While some of these were standard messing around, changing the textures and messing with the enemies kind of mods, others became so big that they later became full releases. Some of these were smaller games such as Days of Defeat, Sven, Co-op, but others have turned into well-known series such as Counter-Strike and Cry of Fear. This had an impact on games to come, specifically with Counter-Strike. After noticing how popular the mod was, Valve hired the developers of Counter-Strike, as they've done with multiple other series, and they went on to work there for some time. This then went on to form one of the most popular PC FPS franchises, and one of the more popular esports games. Also, in a way, Half-Life itself was made with a mod, due to the fact that Half-Life was made using a heavily modified version of the previous Quake engine by id Software. Lastly, Half-Life shows its impact on modern times. One way it does this is the modern game called Black Mesa, which is a project started by fans to recreate the original Half-Life, except with modern graphics and updated physics engines to improve the experience, making it playable for people who are either too good for older graphics or who want a revamped experience of the same game. Another example of the modern impact Half-Life can be seen within Bioshock 1 and Doom 3, and their linear way of telling the story, while having a silent main character that you mold into who you want them to be. Going back to the point on moral ambiguity, this feature was then made more complex going into the future. One notable example of this is released a few years after Half-Life, and that's Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic, in which was a complex moral choice meter measuring whether your character was a light side or dark side, with a lot of moral ambiguity that depended on your actions, as you could do light side actions as a dark side user or dark side actions as a light side user, which, depending on what you went through mainly, would change the ending of the game. These are the reasons why we believe Half-Life and its lasting impact within the gaming scene not only did show a new way of gameplay and narrative telling, which has since become more common, but also created various games due to the modding community, and this has since continued to impact modern games. Therefore, Half-Life was an impactful game in the history of gaming.